What's happening, YouTube? We're talking questions, we're talking answers, we're talking Bilstein. I'm gonna wait for everybody to get in. I'm going live on Instagram now. So let's wait for the boys to roll in here. Hey, girls. I'm sure there's some women. Allegedly. What's going on, Instagram? We are live talking about the Bilstein 8112s or whatever else you guys have questions about. So we're just hanging out, ready for your questions. This Tacoma you see behind me is actually has 8112s, has 8100s. We're pulling them off today to play with Wheel Every Weekend's valving. Ian set us up with some valving. It's should be pretty well dialed. Should fix a lot of the issues we had with them. Pearston 44 on Instagram. Tacoma rear shock rear location with 12 to 14-inch shock. Oh no, Instagram, don't fall down. Okay, this isn't gonna work. Sorry, Instagram, let me move you. All right. So what was that question? So yeah, it's hard to compare a rear shock relocation with a 12 to 14-inch travel shock Pearston to a bolt-on 8100 rear shock. That said, Bilstein's talking about making universal examples of the 8100. So if you want that rear shock relocation, you want the performance of a position-sensitive shock, and you want to match it to some Bilstein's 8112s in the front, that will be an option in the future. Also, even if that doesn't come out super immediately, they're switching to the 8112 design with the internal bump stops on the JL rear shocks, and I think you can use the 2.5 to 4 inch on those. You just got to spread the mounts a little bit and revalve them, which you would have to revalve any universal shock for the most part. El Regan 81, what shocks do you recommend for my 95 Grand Cherokee Laredo V8? Great, we got this question early on. Let me tell you guys, if you're looking for specific vehicle recommendations, as much as I would love to answer those questions, that's when you go on shocksurplus.com. You reach out to the team directly. We take our time with shock recommendations. We want to know how you're using it, your goals for the upgrade, any other modifications that's been done to it in your budget. And by the time we get through all of that, nobody else is going to have any questions. But some options that we do have for the ZJs, Fox 2.0s, we can make some Kings work from an XJ. You got to have the whole Skyjacker catalog, Bilstein 5100s, and Ranchos wouldn't recommend them, but everything but those Ranchos, all great options. Depends on how you're using it, your goals, and your budget. I'm gonna move you again, Instagram. I'm sorry. F-150 2024 2.7 two-wheel drive. Robbie Zimmerman on YouTube, looking at iBox Stage 2, how would the ride be daily driving with it at 3 inches of lift? So iBox says you can go that tall. Looking at the lengths, if they're anything like the four-wheel drive parts, I would probably keep it at 2.5 or less. And 3 inches means they're going to be topping out a little bit. Let's see what Instagram got. What type cam tech? What type of coating is in the shock body, the darker gray part, and what do you recommend for shock shafts, body guard to mediate shocks being blasted by sand, rocks, etc. So yeah, the 8112s and 8100s now come with their Evo gray coatings, very similar to Cerakote, and I believe they put it on top of the zinc plated body, so they're super stout, and don't have to worry about that. If you want to avoid pitting the shafts and stuff like that, you don't want to put a boot on them. But a lot of brands for a lot of different vehicles will make a shock shaft guard or a shin guard. You get it mounted to the lower shock mount and it covers the shaft. It's not going to seal the shock off from like the environment completely, but it's going to stop debris from hitting it. And you don't really want to seal that shock off all the way. Rob on Instagram is asking, is the basic 8100 smooth body rear ones without adjusters a good pair to the 6112 front? And is it softer like Fox is comparing 6112 to 40, comparing with 6112? So the 8100 smooth body rear shocks will be more comfortable than a 5100 or 5160. Technically, that wouldn't be the pairing Bilstein would recommend. They would recommend you go with the 5100. But it will work. It'll work well. They'll pair well together. I think you'll just end up finding you probably want more shock in the front once you got those 8100s in the back. Sage.Ari got a Tundra 3rd Gen 2025 off-road limited, thinking about the Bilsteins. 8100s, 8112s are probably going to be released around December of this year. Aaron Clark on YouTube, is the ride height adjustable while under vehicle load, or do you have to take the coilover out? On the 8112s, you will want to take those coilovers out, put them on a spring compressor, and make the adjustments. The actual, although the body is steel, the threaded portion is billet aluminum. Although the threads are pretty strong, I wouldn't try to make adjustments on them. There's not a coilover that you can adjust while the vehicle is loaded. There are some coilovers like iBox that you can adjust while installed in the vehicle, but you will still want to take load off the suspension, put it on jack stands. You will break every tool in the world before you can add it, or even take off any preload with the weight of the vehicle on it, even if the springs can handle it. Ramsan 19974, how many miles can you go on the 8112 before needing a rebuild? I don't know, man. So we've had the ones on this Tacoma for like a year now, or close to it, and the oil came out sparkling clean, and the seals look like they're brand new, and it's only really ever seen off-road miles. Maybe 75, 80,000 is a good time to check them. We've never had anybody really be able to wear them out. And I don't think Bilstein has had a lot of people have that issue. So the service you'll mostly be doing is probably every 40,000 miles, 50,000 miles, you'll be changing bushings and bearings. You might get through 2 sets of bushings and bearings, so 80, 90,000 maybe. Who knows? They just seem to last forever. I don't know how they do it, but they just seem to keep going. Twin Spoolie Boy on Instagram, do you know when the 8112 with DSA will be available for F-150 next year? I think it's going to be first quarter. So probably by April, before April, if I had to guess. And then let me check on some questions that we already had in the pipeline, because I do know. I didn't know we had a lot of people who had questions previously. Oh, but let me get to this, to Aaron Clark. Okay, we got to you. Anybody on Instagram? Cool. So I'm going to get to the existing questions we had, if I can find them. Let me see. Where were those? All right, here we go. So over on YouTube, someone was asking about the perfect suspension for a new Bronco. I like the stiffness of the Bilsteins on the road, but want the plushness of the Fox off-road. Do the 8112s meet that needs? Yes, they do. What do you know about the 3rd Gen Tundra kits? Can a stiffer spring be used for heavier loads? No idea yet, but most likely. Pricing on full kit for 3rd Gen Tundras? No idea. Look at the Tacoma kits, and that'll probably give you a good idea. They're actually the 2nd Gen Tundra kits. So anywhere probably from 3,800 to 4,500, depending on options. How do they sound or feel during normal driving conditions? I haven't heard anything. And under normal driving conditions, you don't really feel the JCO and RCO work if you have them set up correctly. Any hints on 14 Gen getting DSAs and rear external? Yes, next year. Do I need UCAs to take full advantage of the 8112s? You will need UCAs to even use the 8112s. In most cases, 8112 hoses aren't going to clear your control arms. How much lift can the 8112s provide? And what's the safe maximum before stressing ball joints or CV angles? That will vary based on application, but there isn't a height that Bilstein will let you get to that would hurt anything in terms of the axles or anything like that. Will I need to retune the 8112s if I add heavy bumpers and accessories later? Probably not, if spring correctly and you have the DSA Plus adjustable option. The high speed and low speed compression adjusters on the 8112s have so much adjustment. It's almost dangerous. So like you can get it so stiff that things will bend on your truck before they bottom out, and you get them so soft you feel like you're going to die. So if you're going to add weight, they're probably fine. You just want to have the right spring so you can stay in the ride zone. How do the 8112s ride on the road compared to the 6112s? They are a lot more comfortable on the road. By being position sensitive, they don't have to make as many compromises in the tune. they're getting progressively stiffer at the end of their travel in either direction. So they are much more comfortable than the 6112s and most anything else below their price point. All right. Leon on YouTube asked thoughts on the new Land Cruiser Prado 250. Did Toyota mess up not bringing over the 300 series? I don't know that Toyota really necessarily messed up by not bringing the 300 series because the Sequoia exists and you can still basically get the 300 series in like the Lexus LX 570. But I do think the 250 series is a weird thing because it's like a 4Runner in many ways in terms of suspension. I don't think you get any different engine options. And maybe a little more space, but I think the 250 is just a weird thing. I do like the way they look, though. I do prefer the look of the 250 over the 4Runner. It's just a weird thing because the 200 series Land Cruiser was distinctly different than the 4Runner, the 5th gen 4Runner and 4th gen 4Runner because they existed at the same time, I think. But I will say, they're pretty good. I kind of like them. I like the way they look more than the 4Runner, but that's kind of very subjective. The 4Runners and the Tacomas as well, both use the tripod style joints. Instead of, even though we know Toyota doesn't have to use that. So, I don't know why they did that, but that's not a big deal. So let's go over to Instagram here. See if I'm all caught up. Runner 4 Rue, Bilstein needs 6 G4Rs for 8112 development. I guess they do. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they have 4Runners because they already have 6112s developed pretty much and ready to come out. So I don't know that they actually need them. Miguel Alestia, I have a question. If I buy King 2.0 smoothie shocks with a reservoir, can you custom valve them for my vehicle and type of use? I guess we could. We really don't like to spend a lot of time valving 2.0s, if we're being honest, because you're going to make compromises everywhere. But we could. You're going to spend money for it. The money you spent on a 2.0 could probably be tuning a 2.0 could probably be offset and get better performance if you just got an off-the-shelf 2.5 that was vehicle specific, but we could probably do it. How much stress the 1.5-inch ride height on the 6112 put on the stock control arms for the F-150 Tremor? It actually doesn't really. So it's not physically stressing the part per se, but the issue comes from on the F-150s. The spring is really close to the stock control arm. Lift height doesn't really make a difference for that, but you will be closer more often with more lift. If you're going to be running over a 33-inch tire, you're going to have coils, or maybe a 34. You're going to have coil spring contact. And also, the 6112s have more in them than the stock ball joints do. So, you will be able to take hits off-road that you may not bottom out on the 6112s, but you might do some damage to the ball joints. Our F-150s, I think it's 23 or 24, same thing. And after about 10,000 miles, I think it is, our ball joints are smoked with 35s. They were no good. We changed them now, but not cash money. Jack of all trades. Yeah, 8112s without DCA adjustment, daily driver, light off-road, good shocks. Sorry, Pearston, we don't have any shops we recommend in Texas. Mr. Yuli, actually removing the sway bar on these Tacomas does help the ride off-road. We've kind of noticed that for independent wheel movement, even at speed, the sway bar can kind of make it a little harsh, give you a little jostle. So it does help ride quality off-road, but you are going to get a lot more sway. It's a good thing you got those DSAs, though, because you can bring in more low-speed compression, make it drivable. This truck's almost never had a sway bar, and, it's totally fine. You get used to it, and it's definitely worth the articulation and traction off-road. And it, does make a little bit of a difference in ride. Wasatch Weirdo purchased 8112s from DSA Plus 48 Tundra. Then they added a bunch of weight, i.e. bumper, skids, camper. Do they run a stiffer springs, the coilovers on a Tundra? So the problem with the second gen Tundras in particular is they take a pretty unique spring. So there's not really a spring out there that's stiffer. I don't think I would put a lot more rate on those. I would just, if you can get to the, as long as you're above the minimum lift height, that's going to be your best bet and keep the stock spring. Regarding bottom out control, does that reduce total amount of travel for the shock? If you're talking about the JCO, the Jounce cutoff on the 8112s and the RCO, it does take up room in the body. So if you were to compare real world travel numbers of an 8112 setup to a lot of other, 2.5-inch body coilovers, they might have a little bit less travel. It's never been once though that we've ever wished for it. Particularly an independent suspension vehicle, you're never going to see that last little bit of bump travel and articulation, almost regardless of what you do. It's just not happening at low speeds. And when you hit something hard at speed, you can set these up to bend your truck in half before they bottom out. So you do see a slight travel reduction compared to other coilovers, but they're also usually longer, fully extended. So like articulation is comparable, if not better. They are harder to bottom out than anything else. So that lack of bump travel really, isn't hurting you. Leon over on YouTube asked, how do lifts work on unibody vehicles like Honda Passport, Bronco Sport, Subarus? How is that different than lifting a body on frame vehicle? It's really not any different. The main thing that really differs is they generally have independent rear suspension, which requires a lot more corrections to make work. But it is easier. There is a level of ease to it for more geometry corrections because the subframes on a unibody vehicle, so where all the control arms, drivetrain bolt into, are separate from the unibody chassis or bolted on separately with the unibody chassis. You can throw some spacers under there, correct axle angles, geometry with less parts in some cases. So I mean, it's kind of the same. It's just because the cross members, so to speak, are bolt on rather than welded on, it's easier to space them out and do things. Does adjusting ride height affect spring rate to a noticeable degree? On linear springs, the functional spring rate is going to be staying the same. What is changing is captured spring force and usable droop travel. So if, let's say, at full extension on a coilover, it has a 500 pound per inch spring, it has 3 inches of preload. That means by the time the coilover fully extends, there's still 1,500 pounds of spring force enacting on the damper or on the suspension. And additionally, as you add preload and extend a coilover further, the coilover stays the same total length, but it is sitting higher up in its travel. You have less droop travel. So our general rule of thumb is, as long as you have at least 3 inches of down travel, you're probably all right. And most coilover manufacturers have a preload adjustment range that keeps spring force mostly within really in check with a marginal change. So like if you are noticing a drastic change in terms of stiffness, in terms of preload, it's oftentimes more from a lack of droop travel than the actual spring force itself. Devin asked on YouTube, did you guys use the linear race pistons from Wheel Every Weekend or just the stock pistons? We reshimmed the stock pistons. This is technically the owner Sean's, bigger Sean's, the taller one. I'm the short one. Has the doesn't have a sway bar in, and he wanted to make sure that he didn't have as much sway as he does now. So instead of going to the linear piston, which would probably perform better for how we're using it, to reduce the body roll or to keep the body roll down, we stuck with the standard digressive pistons. Now, what I would have personally done, but we're just doing it in the path that Sean wants to do, is I would have put a sway bar back on it in the front. And then I would have done Apex Designs quick links, and then I would have maybe considered the linear piston and that whole setup. But we're going to see how this does, and we now know a direction we can go if this isn't, exactly what he wants. Now, I'm going to say we weren't unhappy with these 8112s or 8100s. They were great. We just wanted to see if we could get a little bit more out of them. And we did find, I think, like, there were some areas they were lacking on the valve stack on both the main piston and the RCO. The rebound just wasn't enough. We were talking to Ian at Wheel Every Weekend about, like the shim stacks of the vehicles that Bilstein has done otherwise than these Tacomas, and they have significantly more rebound valving. Great example of that is the Broncos have like, what is that, like a 80% thicker, 80% more rebound valving and 50% less spring rate. So we definitely added some rebound, and I think that's what they needed. Leon asked, what's the main competitors 8112s from other big brands? Honestly, the Dobinson MRRs and LME BP51s are both great. It's a different league. I would say probably the closest competitors, that are going to be available for the same applications are going to be like a Fox 3.0 or 2.5 factory race series internal bypass, King 2.5 and 3.0 internal bypass, electronically controlled stuff like the Icon CD EV SDI E-Click. And we'll have to see what those new Dirt King shocks with the external bump stop built into them do, because that's kind of like the Bilsteins, but on the outside. So that's a good competitor. But the Dobinson MRRs aren't position sensitive. They have rebound adjustment, which is nice, but doesn't make up for the lack of position sensitivity. And that's not a knock on the MRRs. They're amazing. I love them for the money, but we're talking about different price points. And then the OME BP51s have that little 50 millimeter piston. They're usually pretty short on travel. They are great. They last a long time. The aluminum body is super corrosion resistant, obviously. And they're great to set up for load. And the rebound adjustment is super nice, but like we went from BP51s to the 8112s on this Tacoma. It's not even like, it's like a different world in terms of like the things you can get away with the truck. Now, like in terms of low speed comfort, they're very close. I think actually, MRRs and BP51s are very close. But when it comes to the big bump stuff, and it's the Bilsteins do things nobody else can. And I would even hazard to say they would be my choice over a Fox or a King 3.0 internal bypass. The King design doesn't have like a top out zone per se. It kind of forces you into making them pack. And they cannot generate as much damping force, even with the larger piston. The Fox design is cool. It's super smooth. But it's, you're a half, even the 3.0s have the same size piston as the Bilstein, so they can't generate the damping force. But I guess another two that like are starting to become available are DRTs from Radflow and NBRs from ADS. Those use the Fox design, but their tunability is so amazing that I think they are, worth a consideration, even though the design may not be capable of much damping force body size to body size. Benjamin 556AR, do you think Bilstein will bring out 8112s for 07 to 13 Silverados? Absolutely not, unfortunately. The main problem, and we talked about this a little earlier, the JCO, the internal bump stops on both compression and rebound of the 8112s take up a lot of real estate in the body. That's not a big deal on things like these Toyotas, where the body is relatively long compared to the amount of travel they output. But on the GMs, the body is very short relative to the amount of travel they output. So they're never going to do it, because you would literally be on the JCO and on the RCO all at the same time everywhere you go. You would just like, it would not be position sensitive. It would just be bump stop to bump stop. Yeah, Devin. So like so we were talking about how these 8112s on this Tacoma are getting Ian from Wheel Every Weekend's tune on it. We stayed with the factory digressive pistons on the front because it doesn't have a sway bar, but I was thinking maybe the ultimate solution would be to switch to their linear pistons with his spec valving for a little bit better small bump compliance, and then putting the sway bar back on and using a disconnect. And yeah, Devin, I think that's probably the right solution. I don't know that we'll actually do that. Aaron Clark asks, and I'm guessing you're talking about the 8112s and the 8100s. Are these a good option to improve ride quality on washboard roads with slow vehicle speed? Or do you have to go fast to get them to work? No, so they're very comfortable at lower speeds. The design that makes them able to take huge bumps at higher speeds also means they could be much more plush in the normal ride zone where, and particularly they have a lot more free bleed than, let's say, a 6112 or anything else with a similar size piston, on the primary piston. So they're really good over smaller bumps at lower speeds, washboard roads and stuff like that. The only thing I would say is if you get the DSA Plus models, your adjustments on the low speed and high speed compression adjustment will make a very big difference on the speed that they're happy at. When I've tested them, I can set them up to be very good at certain speeds, but there will always be a zone where they're unhappy. So usually how I set them up is like they might be a little harsh at like 27 to 32 miles an hour, but at 0 to 26 and from 33 to a million, they feel great. So there's usually like a 5 mile per hour zone where it feels like with the off the shelf valving, they're always just a little unhappy on all the applications I've tested them on, but it's a very minor, thing, and they still feel great compared to most other things. So like if you get the adjustable ones, you might have to do some tweaking and you kind of, find the speed you want to drive on a washboard road. And there will be like a 5 mile an hour range where they're unhappy and will be amazing, in every other infinite level of speed everywhere else. Jack of all trades, 8112 on Tacoma. Do you need an add leaf or bump stops to run it the way it is? You don't need either if you are, and I wouldn't recommend most bump stop upgrades outside of like a hydro bump in the rear. You technically can run them on the stock leaf springs, but the stock leaf packs on Tacomas are so horrible, particularly off-road. You are leaving so much performance on the table and if you can get Icon Adelise for $200, and I will guarantee you they make like a 100% improvement of the rear end, with the same shock. So you don't need them. And if you saved it money anywhere, it would be on the bump stops. We found like with Duro bumps and Timbren active off-road bump stops with the 8100 rear shocks and the 8112s in the front, the combined bottom out support that you got with that new bump stop and the 8112s and 8100s was too much. The truck would get airborne before it bottomed out all the way. So you can save that. If you want to spend the money, get hydro bumps. We have Icons. They work great. I would definitely recommend at least spending the money on the Add Leaf. And if you're going to be doing 8112 and 8100 things, your leaf pack is going to make the decision to be replaced for you anyway. So at least with the Add Leaf, you'll get another year or two out of it. So increasing lift height is the only way to keep it in the ride zone. Yeah. So most 8112s are not designed to go all the way down to stock height. They're usually like 1 to 3 inches, depending on application. You want to put them in the middle of their ride. You want to be within that lift height range. If you add weight and you sag below the lowest recommended lift height, you need to add preload, lift it back, and put it in the ride zone. Position sensitive shocks are sensitive about position, so they can be some of the best riding things in the whole world when set up right. But if you're in the bottom out zone all the time, it's going to be the stiffest thing you've ever felt in your entire life. Musical harp. Hello, what do you think about flat out suspension? Well, that's a good question. I think pretty highly of them. I got a set. I have like a completely custom set of their GR40R coilovers and shocks on my beater second gen MDX. It's an absolute giant piece of junk, but I clocked like 40 miles an hour through the same whoops. We were able to go 65 with 8112s on a Bronco. It's pretty good. They're a little stiff, but like that's what I wanted. So like sick. I think they're sick. They've held up. Like I've jumped them so many times, and like I have broken other things on the car, but not those coilovers. So they're really good. And I think their trail series kits are like their trail runner kits are like the best. I don't want to say budget solution, but like more budget oriented solution to get a lift the right way rather than getting spacers and actually have more travel. Yeah. If you have a flat out suspension, you can reach out to us directly. We might be able to set you up with that install. Matthew on YouTube asked, question, should I upgrade 8112 from iBox Stage 2R? The 8112s are in a completely different league and will do everything the iBox Stage 2 will do, things the iBox couldn't even dream of. They're a completely different league. Do you need them? I don't know. I don't know how you're using your vehicle, but the 8112s are going to be exponentially better than the iBox. Is there an 8100 for another platform that would offer 12 inches of travel and be able to bolt into a JK? No. Not that I can think of. No, there's not an 8100 off the shelf that has 12 inches of travel. There are very few shocks that have a 2.5 inch body shocks. I don't think there are really any that will mount to your factory mounts and have 12 inches of travel. It's hard to package that and have a usable amount of travel without like it being too compressed or whatever. If you want a 2.5 inch body that has 12 inches of travel and you don't have like a ton of lift or anything like that, probably gonna have to go cut, like, just get a universal or run a JL spec shock, cut your tower off and burn in a new tower for the JL stuff. Mr. Yuli, what settings are you running? That's a good question. I don't even remember anymore. We'll have to get it once we get them back on. We'll get them reset up. But I'm pretty sure we're all the way in on low speed compression, about the middle on JCO, and about the middle on high speed, and then probably 3/4 of the way in on compression on the rear bypass, and like almost all the way stiff on rebound. Wasatch Weirdo, would you recommend getting the 8112 DSA Plus tuned if I feel like they aren't running as good as they should be? It could be. Yeah, if you've run through the adjustments, you've spent the time to actually dial them in with the adjustments you can make properly, and you feel like there is more to be gained for your specific use case and your specific build, tuning might help. But there is also a limitation of components. If you're getting into situations where like you just don't have enough travel, we can't make travel come into fruition. 2025 4Runner overlanding setup. I'm not fast. Yeah, I mean the 8112s might be overkill, but you can definitely get into something like Dobinson MRRs that are going to feel better than the iBox. You'll probably find the two things that you're going to run into with the iBox is if you run in anything over a 33-inch tire, they're going to probably not be happy. They're going to start to dribble, and you're going to notice some harshness and instability. Two, if you have any weight in them, they're going to struggle just being a 2-inch body. And if you start getting into hard trails, a 2-inch body is going to be a limitation. Until that's the case, you're probably fine. Otherwise, probably Dobinson MR is going to be the right way up your alley. Stock Gen 2 Raptor King Ranch with 8112s. The 8112s are great. 8 inches of travel is not going to let you do Raptor things. So it kind of depends on what your goals are. If it's a trail rig, I might consider the 8112s. If it's or like a street truck, you're just driving on the street most of the time, you'd probably be fine with the 8112s on a regular F-150. If you were to be, if you wanted to go fast off road, there's going to be no comparison to a Raptor or anything that has more than 8 inches of travel. So it depends. Like I would not want to be on a forest trail in a Raptor. They're too wide. They're too long. But an F-150, still a little big, but fine. And the 8112s are very comfortable, so. I have an 07 Troma with 6112s and drive hard. Either option is going to be better than that. If you drive hard, though, you probably are going to wish you had the Raptor. But your trails might dictate that. That said, you don't necessarily need to go to a Ford to get that. And I know my usual answer is just go to the Ford dealership because it's almost always the answer. But like second gen Tundra, you can like throw a long travel kit on it, some good leaf springs and some good shocks, and do everything a Gen 2 would do. Yeah, Fox offers a 12-inch travel. The Performance Elites, I don't think are actually a true 12-inch that you could use. But yeah, if you want something position sensitive, cut your tower off, set it up to run a JL stuff, you can run bypasses. Let's see here. Yeah, and so just an update on the 8112s that are coming out right now. Third gen Tundra and Tacoma might even be as soon as the end of this year. We know Tacoma is getting 6112s by the end of this year. Fifth gen 4Runner and fourth gen 4Runner hopefully are getting the dual speed compression adjusters, the DSA plus front coilovers, hopefully by the end of this year. F-150 DSA Plus is probably first quarter of next year, and then very similar timeline to the F-150 for new 4Runners, LC250, and everything like that. We actually just set up the Papadakis race team, Stefan Papadakis FD team. They take care of or they build and run Frederick Osbo's cars, won a bunch of championships. We're working with him to fandangle some 8112s on his new GX 550 using Bronco front coilovers. I think we're going to have to switch the springs. He did a custom top hat and lower mount, and fifth gen 4Runner 8100 bypass shocks with an extended lower mount. And those have been working good. And so if that's all, and I would bet that's all Bilstein's doing, so they're probably pretty close to development. Yeah, so Matthew over on YouTube has a 6th gen 4Runner. He's overlanding. It's got some weight. It's getting floaty. So with this iBox Stage 2R kit, and he's looking to go upgrade to 8112s. 8112s are going to be amazing. If you're keeping it slow, might be more than you need. And the only thing I would say is position sensitive shocks are sensitive about position. So if you have enough weight to sag in and out of the ideal ride zone, you might want a load leveling upgrade. Sumo springs, whatever. Otherwise, you might want to consider something electronically controlled, like an Icon CDV, just because they won't punish you if you sag too much. So you might end up, and I don't know what the lift height range on the 8112s and 8100s for the 6th gens are going to be because they're not out yet. But you might, if you're going to be heavy when you wheel it and light when you daily drive it, you might, end up wanting to set it for a little bit more lift height or, set it up to have some load leveling upgrades. Yeah, frying pan sound. Yeah, we can help you with that. Reach out to the team directly with how you're using your vehicle, your goals, and how much you want to spend, and we'll be able to send them out. Chuck Smooth, 8112 for Gen 3 Tundra released before SEMA. They said they were going to do it. I just talked to the guys at Bilstein like a week or two ago, and they are probably not going to actually be available to the public until December. It was supposed to be like by now. So I think what they're going to do is release them, say, hey, 8112s, but you're not going to be able to buy them until December. Devin asks, have you guys had to reinforce your 2nd gen at all? We have to. We haven't done it, but we have to. The core support on this truck is starting to tear. The alignment cams are stripped, and I think the holes are wallered out. I think it needs some. I think the rear shackle hangers are about to go. So we have not, but we should. And I think that decision will be made for us very soon. That's the thing about these 8112s and 8100s and stuff like that. Although it is still mid-travel, you can often set them up to handle things that the rest of the vehicle can't. I remember Bilstein was telling us during the development for the Bronco 8112s, that on their test rigs, which they sold, somebody's driving around with a Bronco like this. And if you bought that, look at your body mounts. But all around the body mounts on the tub of the body, they were starting to bend and mushroom around the body mount because they were hitting things so hard that like the body was slamming down on the chassis, pushing through the rubber body mount and just bending things. And I think they even ripped a pivot off. So like, if the one thing I will say is the 8112s are a spectacular value for what you get, but that is only the cost you see up front. If you want to find the limits of their performance, you might have a couple more expensive bills to pay. Marcus Young, let us know what kind of vehicle you have, and we might be able to get you something. But anything but second-gen Tundras on the 8112s can take a different spring, and in a lot of cases Bilsteins have different spring options. They haven't released like heavier rate springs for the Broncos, but they're 400. You can get a 16-inch 3-inch ID 450-pound spring at iBox, super easy. They sell spring kits for the Tacomas and 4Runners, second and third gen Tacoma, fourth and fifth gen 4Runner in a 650 or 700s. Since the standard comes with a 600. So yeah, you're pretty much covered. I would assume the F-150s as well. The reason why the Tundras are not is the spring geometry on second-gen Tundras is super tricky if you want to get anything more than 2 inches of lift out of them, and coil bind starts to become a problem. So they use kind of like a beehive coil where it's like wider at some wraps so that you can add more preload without the coils actually hitting each other. And so like regular 3-inch ID springs don't fit. Basically what coil bind is the wraps of the spring. So each bar is touching themselves, right? Is hitting the next wrap of the spring before the shock can fully compress. And so they mitigate that by some of the wraps being wider. So so they kind of compress in like that rather than fouling on top of each other. Yeah, so on a second-gen Tundra, if you have additional weight, you're just add more preload. You're not going to be able to hit the maximum lift height settings, but you never really wanted to do that anyway. Just add more preload, and they should be fine. That is like a 16.5-inch, 650-pound spring. So you should be able to at least get 2.5 inches of lift with the existing preload adjustment. But yeah, that is the only problem with that particular part. There's no spring options, but like ultimately, I think they can do something like on a stock weight vehicle, like 3.6, 3.8 inches of lift. You should have more than enough preload adjustment. And realistically, on Toyotas in particular, the taller you go, the more diminishing returns you get. You have less tire clearance, you have less articulation. 9 times out of 10, you never worried about the front end bottoming out, but you do worry about it topping out, and that's something they do all the time. So being lower, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, the spring thing is kind of makes it difficult. We've had people kind of get a 16-inch 700 on there, but you end up having to like grind out like a half inch of the first wrap of the coil on the top. I don't know if that's good or bad. That truck is running those coils still and hasn't had issues. It's fine. But officially, I can't recommend doing that. SBC just joined. What's going on, SBC? Update the new control arms. SBC updated their control arm design. So like there's mostly all the same part number, but the 2 is now a 3. We got them on our F-150. They're doing really good. We actually have the old 25470s on this Tacoma that we're getting rid of today just to test another arm. But they have actually survived some things that, like, I have seen when we're shooting. We do this truck gets used for a lot of tracking shots. So it's like there's a camera on the side of it and it's following a vehicle through the whoops. In the whoop section, we hit a lot on the left side that this truck's almost always on, it's chill until there's like 6 giant whoops at the end. And sometimes whoever's driving it will be driving, paying attention to the shot, not realize like there's the mega murder whoops at the end, and just boom. SBC still hauling good. So yeah, Expedition Kitchen has a 2016 Tundra. Can I get a bypass for the rear, a 12-inch bypass for the rear, maybe from a Jeep? Bilstein sells in their 9100 series 2 and 3 tube 2.5-inch or 3-inch body bypass universal shocks. So you totally could. I don't know how that clears your Camberg shock relocation, but I think you could probably get a Bilstein bypass in there. You could also try using the Jeep stuff. You would just need to have it retuned, but you would have to retune any bypass going into that relocation. I don't know the specifics of I don't know the specifics of the clearance in terms of tube placement on those camber kits. I don't know if they use a custom tube layout. A lot of times on those rear shock relocations to clear a bypass, they need a bypass shock with a custom tube layout. I don't know if that's going to match the what they do. But there's also the option to run internal bypass options. Like if you wanted to go vehicle specific, there's JLJT 3.0 internal bypass, at which point you still have a 2.5-inch piston. You still have a bypass shocks, but you don't have like the same clearance issues because it's just effectively on the outside of smooth body. The 9100 bypasses don't have internal bump stops. They're a traditional external bypass shocks. The 8100s meant for your truck aren't going to be able to use all the travel of the Devers offer though. But yeah, so how a bypass shock works is oil bypasses the main piston through the tubes until the piston passes those tubes, and then all the oil is forced through stiff valving of the main piston. Adding an internal bump stop is redundant because they have that bump zone built in. What is better for off-road speed, Bilstein or Fox? It depends on the price point. Fox is... It depends on the price point. So, like, the most similar mid-entry level parts from Bilstein and Fox would be like 6112s and 5160s and Fox 2.0s. If you're looking at something that takes a coilover shock, the Bilsteins are better. But for a little bit more money, you can get a Fox 2.5. But for a little bit more money than that, you can get the Bilstein 8112s, which are better than that. So it kind of depends on price point. At the bottom and at the absolute top, it's Bilstein. In the middle, for the regular 2.5 factory race and performance series. They're about there. And yeah, Marshall, I think it is time for you Thunder guys to get Raptors. Best value for money on suspension for a 2017 Ford Ranger in Australia. Probably Dobinson's, our Rangers are different, so the options are different. I haven't really spent a lot of time with the Australian trucks because they don't make them here. Jonathan Solandi, reach out to us directly on the website for your vehicle recommendations like those. Reach out to the team. They'll be able to steer you in the right direction. What knowledge do you have on the Rough Country Vertex shocks? They're tuned like shit. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. We've had 2 customers come in who bought the kits and just wanted them off as soon as possible. And another couple of customers that had a lot of issues. I think the thing I like to say is sometimes things are a good deal and sometimes things are cheap for a reason. Yeah, so Expedition Kitchen, if you don't want to spend the money on a hydro bump, Timbren SES, Duro bumps, and then Perry Parts they just like design 3D printed bump stops. They seem to work really well. We haven't tried them. They look good. Seems like a smart dude. Seems like a smart group of dudes. So I would lean towards that. Can I fit a set of Tacoma 8100 bypasses on my 4Runner? not effectively in a way that would make sense. You need to change the hoses and lower mounts in the lengths around. And I don't know why you would do that when they make 8100s in the right length, probably for your 4Runner if it's a 4th or 5th gen. 3rd gen release date, they're probably going to announce them at SEMA in November in the next couple of weeks. We probably won't be able to get them to anybody until December. Could you get away with a 2-inch rear lift with 8100 bypasses on a 2nd gen? They're good to 2.5. Yeah, so the 8100 bypasses, I don't know where you're reading 1.5. Bilstein lists those as a 0 to 2.5. Maybe we have it mislisted if you're looking at our site. If we do, let me know, but there is 0 to 2.5. You're totally fine. Buzz SR5 on Instagram, check them out. Has a 1.5-inch out leaf with 1-inch coach builder shackles, and it works fine. And yeah, if you're not gonna cut the mounts out, the 8100 bypasses are a good option. If you want something that pairs well with the 8112s, has a similar amount of or has more travel, check out the Icon Omega 2 bypass. They're RXT spec shocks. They pair up really well. You're just gonna have to service them more often than a Bilstein. That's actually something we do a lot too on Tacomas and Tundras. Those RXT spec rear shocks have the lower mount offset, I believe, actually. And I should have remembered this earlier, Expedition Kitchen. But I think they have 11.5 inches of travel, or right at 12. And they do that because they can keep a shorter extended length, because instead of mounting at the bottom of the eyelet, with the shaft here, they're like that. So they do a 90 and mount over here. It also increases motion ratio a little bit. So that 12 inches of shock travel might be more 12.5 at the wheel. Pretty cool. And they're quick adjusters, just like the Bilsteins. They have a similar amount of settings. Tuning is very similar, so they pair up very well. And that's something you can do on Tacomas as well. I even believe the bypass shocks for the 4Runners from Icon, Omega 2 bypasses, are a little longer than 8100s. I don't know that we've tried that pairing yet, but, if it worked twice, it'll probably work 3 times, I'll tell you. Or it works for 2 vehicles, it'll probably work for the 3rd. So that's a good option. Those RXT spec rear shocks are, for anything leaf sprung, are largely the longest travel option out there. But something I'm surprised more people don't do, or more people don't set their kits up to do this, are Gen 2 or Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, any Raptor rear shock. If you go Gen 2 plus, you can get a 3-inch internal bypass shock that has 12 inches or more travel. I think they have 12.5 from the factory. And they're 1/2-inch eyelets on both sides, 1/2-inch ID by 1.5 inches wide. And so they should fit, any aftermarket mount kit usually takes a 1/2-inch bolt, 1.5-inch mount spacing. So that's a really cool option. And even if you get the live valve stuff, I think RPG or SVC sells a live valve delete kit, kind of just sets them in the middle of their adjustment. Or you can go to SDI, get a universal kit, and have a 3-inch body internal bypass, 12-inch travel, electronically controlled shock. You would just need to have a coilover in the front that had a remote reservoir and could be paired with the SDI electronically controlled reservoirs, which I find pretty cool. And the internal bypass design makes the electronic control kind of possible, because if you look at an external bypass and you follow the oil path, a lot of that oil is recirculating around the piston and isn't necessarily, or at least at a very high rate often, moving into the reservoir. On an internal bypass, the sleeved internal bypass, the oil is flowing into that outer chamber and moves as a whole into the reservoir. So you can control overall valving, the whole curve, the whole range, not just the ride zone of the bypass tubes. Externally, which is why Ford and SDI and Fox is able to have live valve internal bypass stuff, which is pretty cool. I think electronic control is kind of going to be the future for a lot of shocks, just because it allows them to do things that just wouldn't be possible. If any of you guys have ever had adjustable shocks, and you're driving down the road and you're like, shit, it would probably be better a couple clicks here. You get into different situations and that if you've made a lot of adjustments, you could probably make those adjustments there and it would feel better. Imagine if you just had a genie wizard sitting on your shocks doing a happy little dance and making all the right adjustments all the time, and sometimes predictably. They're like, ooh, brother, you just hit full extension very fast. We should probably stiffen these Johns up because you're going to bottom out because you're in the air. They can even set it up to pick up yaw and stuff like that. They're like, ooh, you just steered it real hard. Let's stiffen up the outside. What would be your ideal go fast setup for a JKUR with Curry 60s and 40s? I would go to coilovers. The quintessential issue that plagues any go fast solid axle setup, especially with 40-inch tires, is unsprung mass. You kind of you probably heard old guys be like, it ain't gonna ride good unless it's heavy. Everybody talks about you want to build something heavy. Trophy trucks work because they're heavy, and it's not actually the weight itself that works. It's the fact that because they are heavy, they have very stiff springs, which means those springs can output a lot of energy. Your shocks and your springs have to deal with decelerating, and the funny thing is, this is an Ian quote and a professor quote. My teacher in school said this. Maybe we went to the same school. I don't know, or talked to the same people. But you have to think about your shocks have to deal with catching the acceleration of all that unsprung mass coming up, decelerate it, and then push it back to the ground. It's hard to do when you have 800 pounds of axle and tire on each side. So I would almost lean, I think coilovers are almost the way to go, because once you cut off your mounts, you can kind of set up your geometry. You have more flexibility on spring rate. And that's a really big thing, is optimizing your spring rate relative to your anti-dive and anti-rise geometry to get it to work and not just float the tire everywhere or just yank the front end down every time it tops out. And it is nigh on impossible on a coil bucket setup to be able to get the right spring in it to match the damping. It just becomes very difficult. Normally I'm like, nah, coilovers, you don't need it. You already got a spring. You already got a shock. It's the same thing. On a lot of unsprung mass, a lot of go fast, the coilover is kind of the way to go. It also gives you more travel, and it also ensures the preload on the spring is guaranteed to be a constant. On a divorce coil and spring setup, your real world spring force is changing so drastically between, full compression and full extension. You have all the spring force, it might not have adequate, especially if you want to run a 12-inch travel shock, you might not have a lot of preload on the spring at full extension. It's going to make it do some weird things. So that's where the Kyler coilover makes sense. Two, you might really start considering, even if you're going to, particularly if you're going to run a single shock, a single coilover, you're going to want to start looking into 3.0s, and a lot of the 3.0s are separate coil and shock are limited in travel for the bolt-on stuff. Kind of a really solid shock setup that seemed to have been working really well for the solid axle, or at least the solid axle guys have been using a lot with good success, and therefore us in the industry have the data to be able to tune them accordingly, or those ADS MBRs. They're an internal bypass design, similar to it's a 3.0. Yeah, the MBRs are available in 2.5, 3.0. I think they might have 3.5s, but they have 3.0s. Their internal bypass design, similar to a Fox where they have the sleeve, but rather than just having holes drilled in the bypass sleeve, they have like these rotating assemblies with multiple like varying holes sizes for the ports that you rotate to restrict or allow for more flow, and you can move those modular assemblies up and down pretty much anywhere on the body, and that works pretty good. There's not a 3.0 bolt-on JK shock that I can think of. Right, I think Radflow or ADS might have one, but they are limited in travel. Once you get into a 3.0 and the bolt-on stuff, they generally have to limit travel either because of clearance or they can't put a big enough reservoir on it for the amount of oil displacement. But you can get ADS MBR coilovers, and they're 4-way adjustable, so dual speed compression, dual speed rebound. Cash money. And ADS will build them, has a lot of flexibility on lengths too. Radflow also uses a similar design on their DRT series. Like, first part, all the same. The only thing you lose out on is their dual speed compression, and they don't have the dual speed rebound, but they're significantly cheaper. So you can get something almost as good. And they're almost as good, and they're less money. Is there 8112 for GX460 on YouTube? Yes, there very much are 8112s for GX460s. They are basically the 5th Gen 4Runner part. We have them up on our website, shocksurplus.com. If the link is broken, just look it up as a 2010 to 2024 4Runner. Yeah, Marcus, the wibbly wobbly time. If you took my hands away, I wouldn't be able to talk. And yeah, Dirty Bug, rebound adjustment is super rare. One of the primary reasons is most of the time to have a rebound adjustment, it has to be either a free bleed adjuster like the old Cuskers, or like Dobinson's or a lot of other brands, or even Bilstein has these where they add preload to the rebound shims and they run basically like a ring and pinion to a rod that goes through the shaft, and it eats up real estate on the shaft itself, so it makes the shock longer, and the shaft is now hollow, so it's weaker. So most brands try to steer away from that. The other thing is rebound is very much rebound for most people in an off-road application is not as like intuitive to adjust as compression. And I can't tell you, this is not a knock on Dobinson MRRs because I like the MRRs, but I can't tell you how many times I've like gotten people's vehicles with MRRs be like, you sold me this thing that rides like shit. And I get in and the rebound set wrong and like just 2 clicks of rebound and it's amazing. There's like 12 clicks of rebound. They were 2 clicks off and it rode like shit. But ADS is able to do it. They have this like 2-way check valve thing that's like at the reservoir port. So it has like a recirculating 2-tube or 2-hose reservoir design. So oil has 2 different flows, and that's like only possible because of the internal bypass design. You could not I don't think you could make that work on like a traditional smooth body or other shock design. So yeah, rebound ends up being rare in the side-by-side game though. Like UTV guys have rebound on everything. RJ Deans, I have a 2nd gen Tacoma. What's the best way to add some travel to the rear? Leaf packs under 2-inch light and 8100s. Your shocks are going to be ultimately the limitation on travel. Bilstein doesn't really use travel loading spacers, I don't think, on the 8100, so there's not really much more you can pull out of those. If you want more travel, check out like an Archive Garage or JD Fab, a lot of different, I think All Pro even has one now, rear shock relocation, where you can run a 12-inch or 14-inch travel 2 or 2.5-inch body shock. If you want to run a bypass, I think you need a custom tube layout, but you can run an internal bypass or when the universal 8100 zone control shocks come out, those work as well. All right, guys. Well, that's my hour. If you guys have more questions, shocksurplus.com. We got you covered. Tomorrow, we got the Shocks in 60 Seconds on these here 8112s. Keep an eye on our stories. We might have some more updates about this revalve on these. And, well, we'll be doing this every week. It seems like on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific. So catch us next time. And otherwise, you know the deal. I say it all the time. See you on the trails.